You ever heard the elder generation say, back in my day, I used to have to walk uphill both ways to school in the snow?
Yep, and
Yeah.
we did.
Yeah. And we would laugh at them when they would tell us that because it made no sense. But today, we're going to talk about something that really was just as difficult as going uphill both ways in the snow. And that's watching a movie that was no longer in theaters.
Right, right. Yeah, not as easy as it is just to pick up your remote and everything is one click away and you can watch anything. Sometimes it took us months to be able to rewatch or to even watch for the first time a big movie that's been out, that's been released.
Yep. So if you're wondering what it was like back in our day to try and watch a movie at home, this is the show for you. This is Two Grandpas Talking Tech, Retro versus Modern Edition. I'm your host, Greg Cunningham.
And I'm your host, Jay Benjamin. Thank you for joining us today. This is a fun one. And this is one that we like to share with the younger generation because it is going to be mind-boggling to some how we used to live. Right? It's almost like
Yep.
the dark ages for some people.
All right. I'm going to do a quick history lesson here. So today, you can stream anything almost anytime, right?
Right.
Even a brand new movie, Project Hail Mary, one of my favorite movies so far this year, is coming out
Hmm.
on streaming this week. This week.
Yeah.
And it's still in the regular movie theater. That didn't
Yeah.
happen back in our day, did it, Jay?
No, no, not at all. Sometimes it was months, months and months and months, if not a year before a movie left the theater till we can actually watch it at home, in the
Yep.
comfort of our own home. So,
Yep.
and there was a lot of technical issues around that too that that wasn't easy because even when we got to watch it at home, it wasn't as simple as just hitting the remote and watching it, right?
Yep.
There was quite a few steps to that. So,
All right. So we're at streaming today. Now, most of you are going to associate, well, at least the generation that might be listening to this. If you're of our
mhm.
generation, bear with us while we educate the youngins.
Yeah,
But when we say Netflix, everybody thinks of exactly that, streaming everything. But no, there was a time when Netflix sent you physical media to watch a movie on.
right, right.
So,
And that was pretty advanced too during that brief
yep,
period, at least for us. That was pretty cool. You mean to tell me I can just go to work and when I get home, I check the mail, the movie I've been wanting to watch for months is right in the mailbox? That was pretty advanced for us too.
yep. And then before that, there was VHS, which is where we're going to spend most of our time today, I think. We'll briefly touch
Yeah,
on streaming today, but I think everybody understands that. But we're going to talk about what it was really like. So we're going to work from the
yeah,
back forward. We're going to start with that experience and I'm going to share mine. And then Jason's going to go into what everybody would, if you know anything about this, you're going to associate it with. So I grew up in a
yeah.
small town. We didn't have a lot of big chain stores. We had a local video store. I still remember it was in the shopping mall. I still remember what it looked
Mhm.
like. And I would walk in through the door and it was in the corner of a shop and there would just be rows and shelves of little cardboard cutouts about 8 inches tall by about 4 inches high of the movie
Mhm.
poster of whatever movies were out at the time. Now, I'm getting to the important part of this. That was the video store. Those little cardboard cutouts sometimes had behind them a box that actually had the video itself on a
Right.
tape, not a cassette tape, but a videotape. It was bigger, thicker, all that kind of stuff. So that's the store. But what I really remember is that for a very, very long time, we actually didn't have a machine capable of playing said video. And
Yep.
so what did we have to do? Mom or dad had to call the store. Yes, call the store. There was no internet. folks. There was no internet. And call the store and say, I would like to reserve a machine to play the video. It's called a VHS machine. I would like to reserve that for this Friday through Monday. And the store
Mhm.
would say, okay, we have one, or sorry, we don't have one, but we may have one on Saturday if it gets brought back on time. So, first of
Yep.
all, you had to reserve the machine. Yes, not everybody had something in their homes capable of playing videos. And then the illustrious Friday came. Mom and dad told you that the machine was available, and we were going to the store on Friday to pick up the machine and rent some movies. And you got all super excited. And you show up and you tell them you want the machine, and they hand you a 3 foot by 3 foot by about 2 foot deep black puffy case with
Yep.
handles that had this giant machine on the inside and 10 or 15 cables. Because when you took the machine home, you had to hope that you could actually connect that particular version of the machine to your TV at home, that the right cable was included, that the last person that borrowed it didn't keep the cable because you didn't just have all these cables lying around because they were
Yep.
special cables. So you had to hope that you could get it. And about an hour later, most of the time, the video machine was hooked up to the TV. Jason, do you remember those struggles of actually hooking up a machine to play videos at your home?
I do, and they never were the same machine, right? There were always several different brands, several different wire types, and yeah, it was always a hassle, but once you got the hang of it, it didn't take quite as long, right? That was our first introduction into audio-visual kind of,
Yep,
technology and things like that, so, yeah, I remember, and also the video game systems, renting those, it wasn't just for me, it wasn't just the VHS rentals, and
right.
and like you, we started off renting the whole machine, the big black box, bringing it home. Nope, the wire's not in there. Going back. Okay, I think we have a wire in the back. They grab a wire, you go home again, and you finally get it hooked up in enough time to binge watch your movies.
Yep, yep. So that was part one. So that was uphill one way. Now, the uphill
Yep.
the other direction was the fact that when you walked in, again, remember, this is like a year later that that movie you saw in theaters a year ago. I'm going to use E.T. as my example. That movie that you
Hmm.
saw in movie theaters a year ago is now available to watch in your home. And so you're all excited and you go into the store and you look up on the top shelf in the number one slot because they said number one, number two, three, whatever the case may be. And
Hmm.
there's like 10 little cardboard cutouts of E.T.'s movie poster up there. And you're like, yes, they have the movie. We can get that too and watch it. And then you get a little closer and realize there's no box behind any of them, which
Yep.
means that all 10 copies for this whole community, that's all the copies of ET that were available, have already been rented and are not
Right.
available for you to use. And so then you drop your head and shoulders and you walk up to the front. And yes, you have to talk to a person again and say, do you have any copies of ET? And they say, no, but one of them is scheduled to come back tomorrow, maybe. Oh, good. Can I reserve that? We don't reserve those. It's first come, first serve. So
Yeah.
if you
You
want
just
to,
have
it's
to be
due
here.
back by 5 o'clock tomorrow. You could come in at 5 o'clock tomorrow and see if they brought it back on time. And if you're the first one, then maybe you can take home ET and put it into that giant machine that you're going to go hook up. That's
Right.
how it went. That was renting movies when I was a kid.
Yeah, and there was always someone hanging out at the store, some older teenager hanging out at the store, waiting for that copy to come back that they told you to come back for. And yeah, they usually get it. Yeah, and Greg, this is always something that I wanted to share with this generation because they have things so easy, right? They have a thought, I want to watch this show. They can either pick up their phone, their iPad, watch it on their PlayStation, their television, whatever, instantly, but it was actually a hassle for us. And I say a hassle, it was part of our growing up, right? Oh, I'm saying it's a hassle, but this is stuff, memories that we look back on fondly, even if they didn't have a VCR a player or the movie we wanted. We still left the video store with something. right? There was always something to watch. It was basically Netflix, Amazon Prime, HBO Max, all of their inventory, their library, all located physically in a store. So yeah, a lot of good memories uh, growing up. Do you
Yeah.
remember the first movie you've ever rented?
I don't. I don't.
Yeah.
So,
For me and my brother, it was a Looney Tunes cartoon.
mm,
And they did a bunch of parodies of, Bugs Bunny and the gang did a bunch of parodies of like Rapunzel and Three Pigs and things like that. It was like a compilation tape of all of those. And yeah, that was the first VHS that we rented that we watched with the machine, the big machine. So yeah, a lot of good memories. I love that.
so Jason,
But
you grew up in a bigger town, so mine was just the
yeah.
local VHS store. What was it for you?
Yeah, so we had several local video stores because like you said, you go to one, there was no movie that you wanted to see. We had the ability to go a few miles down the road to check out another one. But like with anything that's great, corporate America says, hey, how can we capitalize on that? And we got was considered the Walmart or the Amazon of video stores back then. And that was Blockbuster Video. Now, I know people hear that name and they think, "Oh, that was the old video store place." And this is what a lot of the new generation associates with video rentals and stuff like that. But for me, it was more than that. It wasn't just where you can go in and rent videos and games and stuff. It was actually like a hangout spot. For the teens and the kids in the area. Like I remember it was a part of a shopping center. That shopping center is still there today. We passed through there few months ago. Of course, the store is gone. It's a restaurant now, but it used to be our local Blockbuster Video. And whenever my mom would be in that shopping center, me and my brother would always, hey, we're gonna be at the Blockbuster. Just come over there when you're ready to pick us up. And it was just, you know, going through and seeing all of the movie memorabilia and the junk that they sell with movies, special editions and stuff, and it comes with this little statue or this T-shirt or this, seeing things like that. Um, they hosted video game tournaments. One of my one of my fond memories of hanging out at the Blockbuster was a tournament that they were going to have for NBA Jam, and I thought I was good. Of course, when you're the best in the house, you think you're the best in the world. When you're the best with all of your friends, you just dominate all of your friends in the neighborhood and stuff. You think that you're the best. And yeah, I remember they told us, you guys, your time slot is like 8 o'clock on Saturday morning, or it's like 9 o'clock on Saturday morning or something. And me and a good friend of mine went and just got obliterated by one kid. And this is all you heard. He wasn't a very friendly kid, but he stood right next to me, and you just heard boom,
Nice.
and it was done just like that. Just like that. So a really humbling experience to learn that, hey, you're not as good at this game as you thought you were. But yeah, it was a hangout spot. It was the staff were, customer service, as we always say, is at an all-time low now. But then back then you would actually have people that love their jobs. Even if they were working at Blockbuster Video, they knew about movies, they knew about games, they knew about the industry and stuff, and they were just good people to hang out with and talk to and stuff like that. So, yeah, people associate, and you see kids running around with Blockbuster Video shirts, the little rental logo and stuff on it, and things like that. But you have no idea. It was yeah, big part of our childhood.
Yeah, and Blockbuster did a good job. I mean, like you said, they had the movie memorabilia, they got into games
Yeah,
when every household didn't have a gaming system. They
yeah,
had, your movie popcorn in a bowl, they had the snacks you could buy at the movie theater, all that kind of stuff. And then, the format switched from VHS to DVD,
yeah,
and which more people are probably familiar with, and they did a good job. So they started transitioning over to DVD, and for a while you could rent the DVD player in the
yeah.
store, and then they had a combination of VHS and DVDs for all of the different titles and stuff like that. So they did a good job with that. But then along comes a DVD behemoth. So, and I don't know a lot of the backstory of how Netflix got started, but
Mhm.
basically came up with the idea, well, instead of making people go into a store, let's just mail them the DVDs and then they mail them back to
Yeah.
us and we'll just basically do the rental out of a centralized place, have thousands of copies of these DVDs on hand, not put them in the nice fancy boxes, but put them in these cheap CD
Mhm.
holders, which is what they always came in. And they probably got worse CD holders back. And half the time they didn't get the paper that was showing the title of the movie and stuff back. But so Netflix goes to DVD service where you could go in and rent DVDs, and then
Mhm.
eventually went to a subscription where you would get so many, right? And so I remember doing some with Netflix, but it wasn't a ton because there was a lot of that time frame where it was right after my wife and I got married, and we just didn't
Right.
have the money or anything to do a lot of that kind of stuff. So this wasn't a big part of it, but Netflix and DVDs and mailing you DVDs, they come in the red wrapper, right? And the red box and all that kind of stuff. So that was a big
Mhm.
deal. Did you do a lot with Netflix from a DVD rental standpoint?
Yeah, I kinda got in on the tail end of that, right? Right when streaming services were starting to pick up. They kept that DVD thing going, for a good while, probably longer than they should have, just to they had a good customer base that still wanted their physical media mailed to them because they've invested so much in their DVD players and their television and stuff like that. So I got in on that tail end of that. I got one of the subscriptions when it was on a special, right? Those last few dying breaths of a company, they were running all kinds of promotions and just trying to pull in everybody they can. But yeah, not really a ton, but I did get a few video rentals from them.
Yeah. And if you want to stick around for a quick 1 or 2 minute post show, we're going to talk about Blockbuster's approach versus Netflix from a business standpoint, not necessarily from a media standpoint, but we'll discuss that a
Yeah.
little bit in the post show. But and then out came Redbox.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Jason, I didn't do a lot with Redbox because um well, they had like one in the small town when we moved out of Houston. But talk to us through Redbox because it sounds like you did some of these too.
Yeah, yeah. So it was basically Netflix's business model, rental service, but it was in convenient locations, right? We didn't have, everybody's used to 2 day shipping or next day shipping so cheap from Amazon. We didn't have that, right? It was, okay, I'll put in an order and next week I'll get the movie. Well, Redbox kind of stood in that gap and said, "Hey, we're going to put these videos in strategic locations." So here in Houston, they were located at like Walgreens, Exxon, the big Exxons, the what do they call those? Like the quick trips with the, or
Mhm.
not quick trips, but
Yeah.
the ones where they had like a kind of a mini grocery store and stuff in it. So they would have them in those strategic locations, and you basically would put in your card. The movie would pop out of like a vending machine. It was basically a DVD vending machine in these strategic locations. And I remember doing a lot of that, right? No shipping. You can stop on the way to work or on the way home from work or on the way to take the kids from school or, whatever the case may be, it was located in the front of your neighborhood. So it basically got us back to that video store kind of model, right?
Yeah.
Without all of the overhead, without all of the uh, uh, you know, paid employees and all of the memorabilia and all of the different kind of things. It was basically just you getting your movie out of a vending machine, and really good idea while that physical media kind of phase, lasted. It was a
Yeah.
really good idea.
Yeah, it was sort of a hybrid, right? It was the store plus the DVD rental sort of thing. But
Hmm.
one of the struggles that it had is that it was a crapshoot as to what you were going to find at any
It
given
was.
Redbox. And because you could rent from one Redbox and drop it off somewhere else. And you didn't
Right.
necessarily have to return it
Right.
on time
That
because they would just
convenience
keep,
thing.
yeah, they would just keep charging you. And so, yeah, I think it was an interesting model, but I think it would have been better if it had been, 5 years before because
Right.
people would have done more with it and it would have lasted longer because pretty soon after that, we started seeing streaming, in particular Netflix and
Hmm.
iTunes. I think those are probably the 2, right? iTunes would start selling you the movie
Right.
online or you could rent it, and then Netflix, of course, became massive, from a streaming
Yeah.
perspective. They pivoted from their DVDs into streaming today. So yeah, but so this was an interesting
Yeah.
time where you would go get physical media. And, Jason, maybe we'll skip for streaming for just a second, but,
Mhm.
you've got a note in here. There is a bit of a return to the past when it comes to entertainment media in general. So, um, LPs,
Yeah.
actual
Y
records are coming back in. People want to buy the latest and greatest albums on records, and
yeah. Yeah.
you're also thinking, you wanna buy some more of this media, not just, basically lease it from Apple or whoever.
Yeah, and I noticed a lot of that on just online period, YouTube videos, Reddit, things like that. People are extremely aware, they're hyper aware that we don't own anything anymore, right? Nobody's buying records because, they pay for their Apple Music or their Spotify Premium, and they can listen to whatever they want whenever they want until it's not available anymore. And I think more and more people are noticing that, hey, what I want to listen to is not available anymore on this platform. It's moved over to the other platform. Now I have to pay them $15 a month to continue to watch the TV show that I love or something like that. So, you know, um, before the whole streaming thing kicked off, there was this whole thing called cord cutting, right? And it was when the um the cable companies kind of had a stranglehold on how we consume media, right? We would pay the cable company $50, $60 a month, depending on the package, up to $150 at the time, depending on the channels and stuff you want. And they controlled how we consume media. Well, then the whole idea was to basically cut the cord, and that was that coax. The cord they were referring to was that coax internet cable that came into the house. So now we reached a point to where the internet companies are controlling the media, right? They own stakes in these companies, the media companies, the production companies, and they're siloing off all of the media, right? Um, Disney now owns Hulu, which owns, Fox and Marvel and Star Wars and all of that. And if we want to consume that media, we have to go to them for it. Whereas Netflix has, you know, the other half of that, you know what I mean? That equation. And now everybody's grabbing all of the media companies and they're siloing things off. So now we find ourselves back in a position and now we want to cut the cord again, right? The internet cord from these companies, from these streaming companies. So yeah, people are back to buying physical media. They're back to buying. I mentioned with the RedBox, there was a short time where people once RedBox started liquidating all of their assets and stuff, they were actually selling these machines to civilians. So you can go on Reddit right now and just Google someone with a Redbox machine sitting in their living room, right? They live in a small condo or apartment, and half of the living room is taken up by a big Redbox that they put on some kind of custom firmware for, and basically using it to view their media and stuff on. So I'm back to it. I went through a period too before streaming where you remember Black Friday, they would have these sales where certain DVDs were deeply discounted, right? You can get a DVD or you can get a season of a TV show for $5, $6 or whatever. Well, if you would pay attention on the back of some of those, you would get the physical media, but you would also have a digital code to download it from iTunes or what was Walmart's version of. They had a
Yeah.
version that kind of was never really popular, but Walmart had a version of a streaming service where you can download digital media and stuff. And um, believe it or not, people really didn't care about that. They had their physical media, so you can actually go to a thrift store or, even GameStop or something like that. Maybe not so much GameStop because I believe people are looking for it. But if you buy that, that digital code is still available if it hadn't expired, and you can download that movie. It's crazy. So I'm really starting to see a shift of people going back to wanting to own physical media, especially when it comes to video games.
Yeah. I think, so one of the challenges so I don't buy a lot of movies anymore. I'm pretty particular about which
Right.
movies I pay the 10 or $20 to buy, and, um but even though I've bought it, I don't really own it because
Yeah.
it's DRM, which is digital rights management. There's DRM on this,
Mhm.
and so Apple essentially, before you play it on your device or whatever, is gonna check to make sure that you're still authorized to do it. So, people that have we've talked before about potentially losing your photos if they're not backed up. It's actually worse with media like this because if for
Yeah.
some reason Apple decided you violated the terms and conditions of having your Apple ID, if they suspend your Apple ID, you can't get to any of that stuff you purchased. I mean, it's
Yeah.
done. You're not gonna
Yeah.
get to any of the Apple Music to listen to, but when it comes to movies or TV shows, if you bought those through the Apple service, what are you gonna do? I mean, I guess maybe if you put them on Plex, you might still be able to do it, but I think with that
Yep.
DRM, anytime you're connected somewhere, it's gonna try and double check to make sure that you're licensed to play this kind of stuff, and so
Yep.
I don't know all the specifics there, and so maybe it's not quite like that, but you run a risk of not being able to access any of this stuff that you have quote unquote purchased through an online streaming service in digital
Mhm.
only format. So what that does mean, however, is like for you, Jason, you've actually got to have something that could play the DVD or play the Blu-ray,
Yes.
or you got to have a record player if you want to have the LPs and be able to do that kind of stuff. And so there is that piece of this, but I just think it's something people should be aware of. Back in the day, if you bought a DVD, you owned that DVD. Right? I mean, nobody
Yeah.
could tell you you couldn't
Yep.
watch it as long as you had a machine capable of playing it, you were good to go. But now in the days of streaming and the internet, basically we're just renting stuff month to month. And if whoever we're renting from goes out of business or decides to cut you off, then you're cut off and that's where you are. I honestly don't think it's that big of a deal personally. Right. I'm not too worried
Yeah.
about any of that kind of stuff happening. And so, but yeah, it is just a very, very different model. So, yeah, you
Yeah.
may want to pick and choose a little bit what you want to purchase the physical copies of versus just having the digital stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially more the older classic stuff. And I know we're gonna get into streaming here, but before streaming, and actually while streaming was going on, I reached this kind of comfortable period where I was okay with letting go of the media because, Greg, you have to downsize a lot, to get to where you are now. And I noticed that because of my love for movies, that I was quickly running out of space. I was quickly like we were getting movies that didn't fit in the cases that we needed, and I was storing them in boxes and stuff like that. And I think a lot of people, a lot of movie lovers ran into that same thing. They're limited on space. They're adding up. I have thousands of movies. So what do we do? We had Handbrake and other software to where we can actually rip the movies. Now, I'm not suggesting this to anybody. This is kind of, and it has always been a kind of legal gray area, right? You bought the movie, you purchased the movie, but you didn't purchase a digital version of it. So don't take this as a recommendation to do that. I'm just saying what I did at the time. And what seemed to work for me was to digitize all of those movies. So everything that I've owned, I still have it. I just don't have the space for the physical
Right.
media anymore. Now I still have a shelf full of Blu-rays in the living room and my James Bond collection and some Star Trek and stuff like that. The stuff that I really wanted to hold on to. But then my regular dramas and horror movies and stuff like that, I kind of ripped those. They're stored on my NAS. We watch them through Plex wherever we are in the world, as long as we have an internet connection or downloaded it to the device. And that's what worked for me. But getting into streaming, I think it kind of gave everybody that false sense of I'll be okay. I can just stream it. I don't need all of these DVDs. I don't need all of these Blu-rays. I don't need all of these games and stuff laying around. I can just stream it until rights
Yeah.
started expiring and contracts started expiring and studios started getting purchased from other bigger studios. And like I mentioned, studios started siloing everything off. And then people started to notice, well, the whole reason why I sold my set of, Stargate SG-1 was because I could always just watch it on Netflix.
Right.
Now you mean to tell me I have to pay Paramount Plus or whoever for it? You know what I mean? I don't know where it's at now, but yeah. Yeah, that kinda woke people up, so but enough of me ranting about that. Do you wanna go into streaming, the period of streaming?
Yeah, let's talk about it. I do just wanted the disclaimer that none of us are attorneys, so whether it's legal to rip physical
Yeah,
to digital, that's a something you have to work out. But um,
yeah,
here's the thing about streaming today. So Jason mentioned cord cutting. So cable bills were super expensive. We had cable
yeah,
for a very, very brief period of time in our marriage, and that was it because it was just so expensive. We
it
just
was.
flat out couldn't afford it. And so once everybody started streaming, it was all this, oh, you're going to be able to cut the cord and not have to pay the cable companies anymore.
Yeah,
So, but what's happened now is if you aren't managing it correctly, you're paying as much to multiple streaming services as you were to the cable company before. It's just
yes,
now more available on demand versus on their programming schedule. But you really aren't saving a whole lot of money in that kind of stuff. And so I wanted to share just a couple of quick hacks that I think you could use to do streaming. I mean, everybody knows how you stream. There's all these services available. They're
yeah,
on demand. As long as you have an internet connection, you're good to go. And so my number one thing is we have Disney Plus. We have the bundle, Disney, Hulu, and ESPN Plus, and whatever it's morphed to now that Hulu's going away, and everything's just
yeah,
kind of under the Disney Plus umbrella. But I haven't paid for that ever because my Verizon cell phone plan has free Disney bundle. So that's
right,
my first
right.
thing that I would suggest you do. You're going to be paying for a cell phone. I know you are. So unless you're Jason and then you do weird things with your cell phone numbers, but you're going to be paying for that. So check out to see if they have a free add on or even a $5 or something like add on and go ahead. I know you run the risk of if you ever leave your company and then you got to figure out how to transfer your subscription over. Okay, fine. Deal with all that kind of stuff, but I haven't paid for Disney Plus ever. So,
Yeah,
that's my number one thing, and there may be some other things that you pay for. Home internet may do the same thing.
yeah,
So think
that's our
about
case
that.
here. We pay for our AT&T internet, and we have the HBO Max for free.
Yep,
Never paid for it. It's all part of it, and that's helped relieve some of the streaming, problems that we ran into.
yep. My number 2 suggestion is to look at bundling. So, like, I don't pay for Apple TV. I wouldn't pay for Apple TV by itself. I don't
Mhm,
watch enough to do it, but it comes with my Apple Premier One bundle, right? Because I'm paying for storage, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago as well. So that would be my next one is see if you can get these bundled together. I actually see like Amazon and a couple of others have been bundling in other competitors' services into their
mhm,
subscription because it keeps you in their platform longer. So you may be able to get
right.
some bundles like that. And then my final thing, which is a definite upgrade from cable, is that most, if not all of these services are not forcing you to into a contract. So once you signed up for cable, you were
Yep,
stuck, right? And you couldn't say, well, I'm going to travel all summer. I don't want my cable for 3 months, turn it off. But most, if not all of these streaming services, you could just turn off when you're not using it and then turn them on when
yeah,
it comes
and
back. And so when the new Star Trek series drops and you want to go binge watch
yep,
the whole season, turn it on for a month and then turn it back off. So you can do that, but what
yep,
it does require is that you're just more deliberate and you're more aware of where you're spending your money, what subscriptions are active and when they're not. One of them that I do is Sling TV has a couple of different options. And when it's college football season, I turn that on for a month or 2, and sometimes I have to bounce between their 2 different types of plans because some games are on ESPN and some games are on Fox Sports or whatever the case may be.
mhm,
But I turn it on for a couple of months, and then I just turn it right back off, and actually what I do is I turn it on for the first game I know I'm gonna watch, and then as soon as I do that and it hits my card, I go in and turn it off because 'cause it'll leave
mhm,
access for the whole 30 days. That way, if I forget later to go turn it off, I don't have to worry about it, right? So it just
right,
automatically kicks off. And if I'm past that 30 days and want to watch another game, then I just repeat that same motion. But that is definitely an upgrade. So don't think most of these, you're not locked into a contract like that. So be aware that you can
yeah,
go in and
yeah,
cancel and restart most of these services at will.
Yeah. And it didn't start off like that. They used to lock you into contracts, whether that was 3, 6, or a year, 6 months probably being the most cost effective one. I remember Paramount Plus was the first one of the first ones that offered, hey, just month to month, and I would tell you, hey, at the end of the season, whenever Strange New Worlds or Discovery or Picard or whatever I wanted to watch, I would just wait to the end of the season, pay for that month, binge watch it. My wife would binge watch a few other shows and stuff like that, and we would let them go. We would let it go after that. So, yeah, yeah, that's a good tip, and I believe it's the same with all of them now.
Yeah.
Netflix, HBO, you can just pay for a month.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, any other tips or tricks or anything else about streaming there, Jason?
No, but I do like to tell this story because I know you forget, and I reminded you the last time we talked about this, but Greg had an idea years and years ago. So
Mm.
he just mentioned like forgetting to turn off your service and having so many services that you forget and then you check your credit card bill or your bank statement 6 months down the road and you have a bunch of months of payments. So Greg was at my desk one day, and we talked like we usually do. And we were talking about having all of these different services and stuff. And you were like, I ought to create an app. This was years ago. This was when the App Store was first taking off, and you remember the whole ad campaign. There's an app for that. There's an app for that, and everybody had an app idea on their head. And you said I should create an app to help people keep track of their monthly services and stuff like that, and then add in a feature to where they can just hit cancel in the app and it'll reach out to the service provider and cancel it, all of that. And here we are, fast forward all of these years ago, and there are multiple services that offer exactly that.
And I'm not
So I
rich
just like to
and I
always
still have to
remind
work.
Greg that.
Yep, I could be retired in a campground somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. I would like to always remind Greg that, hey, you had a golden idea. There's multiple companies that do it. And also the cool thing about it is that certain banks like Chase and what is it, Capital One, I believe they offer that service too, to where you will get a reminder, hey, you're still paying for Netflix. Are you still using this? After 3 or 4 months or something like that. So no more
Yep.
going through a whole year of paying for a gym membership and you never go to the gym like I do.
Yeah, the lesson learned from that is you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, just kind of wrapping this up, I even with all of the risks that we run with streaming, I think I still prefer it today, right? I still like the
The
idea that
convenience, yeah.
if we can go sit down and decide we want to spend $4 on a show and I can have 72 hours to watch it from the comfort of my home on a
Yep.
really, really nice TV screen and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think I'd go back to the old days of Blockbuster. So unlike movies where I would really like to have old school drive-ins available again, but
Right.
I think I'd stick with the streaming world today. I am a little nervous about music just because music is such a big part of my life.
Yep.
If the streaming services ever really went wonky, I'm afraid I'd be paying a lot of money to buy a bunch of the music that I listen to all the time. I'm less worried about it with movies, but this is one of those things where I do think we have been evolved in a good direction, and I don't think I'd want
Yeah.
to go back.
I think this is one of those things where I miss the past on
Mm,
this. I do enjoy the streaming, but now that I reached a point to where I've got rid of Netflix. I don't do Paramount Plus. We have the HBO Go because of our internet service, and Amazon because Amazon has kind of interwound themselves in our lives already. So, yeah, in this case, I think I would rather stay retro and go
uh,
back to the way things were.
All right, folks. Well, I think that does it for today. If you want to stick around for the post show, I'm going to just run Jason through some thoughts that I wrote a white paper on about Blockbuster's business model and why they failed and how Netflix succeeded. And so we'll talk about that for just a couple of minutes. But don't forget to go over to the Tech Grandpas, send us any feedback, hit that like, subscribe, share button. Check out our regular tech episodes. The last episode we recorded was on travel tips and tricks and hacks. And I know a lot of you are probably getting ready to travel, which will make media and travel stuff super important on those trips, especially if you've got kids going with you. So,
Yeah.
really appreciate you watching the show, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, guys. See you next week.
So, Jay, a few years ago, I wrote a white paper about Blockbuster going under because they declared bankruptcy, right? And I think the very last
Yeah.
Blockbuster store was somewhere in Alaska or something like that. And
Yeah. Yeah. It was
um,
somewhere up north.
yeah, but the problem with it was two different business philosophies, and it's one that we've talked about with Apple before. Apple is willing to
Hmm.
cannibalize a current product in order to release a new one.
Yeah.
They're willing to do that, and not all businesses are. And so if I look at Blockbuster and Netflix, they were both at about the same point at the same time.
Hmm.
Netflix elected to cannibalize their DVD rental business, take all the money that they
Right.
were making, which was millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars, and transition their business into the streaming market. Blockbuster chose not
Yeah.
to do that. They just didn't. They could have done that exact same thing, right? They could have been the Netflix of the day because their brand image was stronger
Right.
than Netflix at this point. They just chose not to do it. So they weren't willing to compromise their short-term revenue and invest that into the long-term business outlook. And I mentioned on the show that you miss
Yeah.
100% of the shots you don't take. This was a big miss on Blockbuster's part, and they're gone. And now Netflix pivoted into rental streamings. Now Netflix, like a lot of the other streaming services, is into
Hmm.
um, their own movies and TV shows. So Netflix produced and funded and all of that kind of stuff, and they made it here. And
Yeah.
Blockbuster didn't. Put aside the physical locations. I mean, Blockbuster still could have done some of that and let their streaming service fund the cool show up and do a tournament or show up and
Yeah.
everybody stream the same movie
Yeah.
together. There could have been a whole bunch of that kind of stuff. It's just they chose not to look to the future and they didn't want to cannibalize their existing business to get there. And so I appreciate the fact like the MacBook Neo is a great example from all we can tell that thing is selling like hotcakes. You know
Yeah.
that has to have impacted the MacBook Air market and the MacBook
Yes.
Mini market.
Yeah.
It has to have impacted those. And Apple's like, cool. And they're already trying to figure out what's the next version going to be. So I think if you're going to
Yeah.
succeed, you got to be willing to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And they saw the writing on the wall. They knew times were changing. They
Yep.
knew people were going to shift into digital media and stuff like that, and they refused to change. And you're right. When I saw this and I thought about it, I tried to think about companies that were willing to do that and take that risk. And Apple was the only one that I could think of at the time. And you mentioned the Neo, right? That's the current example of it.
Yeah.
But I think the perfect example and the one that stands out is the iPod, right? They knew the iPhone was going to destroy the iPod market. It just was. And they were okay with that. And look at the success they had.
Yep.
Now, you mentioned Blockbuster failing to adjust, failing to get with the times and stuff. And you're right. But I think I remember them attempting to course correct and going into streaming and all of that. But by then, Netflix had already had such a huge head start on them that it was just nowhere for them to catch up, no way for them to catch up, right? Because I mentioned earlier in the episode that Walmart attempted it. They had a streaming services. I can't remember the name of it. Anybody that's listening, if you can put that down in the comments, because I know I can Google it and find out after the show, but I can't remember the name. But Walmart attempted it too. And with their brand recognition and their, just their power to throw money at ad campaigns and stuff like that, they couldn't stop Netflix's momentum.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think that Blockbuster was just a little too late of them trying to adjust to something that they knew was coming. They
Yeah.
knew it was coming. They saw it coming down the pipeline and they did nothing to adjust to it. And yeah, I think now Blockbuster, not only are they synonymous with old school video rentals and stuff like that, they're also synonymous with things not to do as a company,
Yeah.
right? Everybody always says, you don't want to Blockbuster this thing. You don't want to think that you're too big to fail. You're sitting on the top of the hill and you look down at. 'Cause I believe there was at one point, I don't know when you were researching for your white paper, do you remember there was a point where Blockbuster was going to buy Netflix or parts of it or
Yeah.
buy their physical inventory or something like that. There was something going on between Netflix and Blockbuster, and they were just like, nope, we're not going to
Yeah.
do it. We're not, and that was a mistake. That was a huge mistake.
Yep. All right. Well, this was a fun show. Hope everybody stuck around with us. Hit that subscribe and like button, and we'll be back with another modern or retro versus modern episode in a couple weeks. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks.